Right, these are the still waters of Mapley Reservoir in Derbyshire, and by way of illustration of my point about history not being linear, I'm going to drop this pebble into the water and you will see exactly what time really is. In other words, how it is a series of ripples that go out in all directions. Hello and welcome to today's roadcast. There is an expression that goes along the lines of he who doesn't know his history is destined to repeat it. And if we take the view that in reality, what passes for reality, time is not linear, that everything is going round and round in circles, we come to an understanding that the expression "there is nothing new under the sun" is an accurate one, and that events in history are merely repetitions of previous events. When we say previous, but in that sense everything is actually in the here and now. The past, the present, the future is all combined, if you like, into the here and now. And so, a couple of weeks ago, I think it might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, I put out a roadcast called Lost and Found, and in there I expressed the view, well I explained exactly how I had been labelled, falsely I hasten to add, by the algorithmic control system on the platform X, formerly known as Twitter, as an anti-Semite, because the claim is that I was posting anti-Jewish / anti-Zionist tropes and information, and was also criticising the financial system. So apparently on X, if you criticise the financial system, and all I'm doing is basically examining and pointing out the monetary mechanics of the fake financial system, then you will be deemed an anti-Semite, and quite likely, as in my case, you will have your account throttled by some 94%. Meaning that although I've got 1,800 so-called followers on X, the account's throttled to such an extent that maybe only 6% of those will actually see anything. So even though, for instance, if you go on my X thread, you will see that some of my posts, which are, modesty aside, on target, are in fact only seen by 17 people. If X is deeming me to be an anti-Semite, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's fucking go for it, shall we? Or maybe I should say, in for a shekel, in for a pound. So the subject of today's roadcast is a controversial one, at least in some quarters, but historically speaking, it's not new. What I'm going to talk about is not new. So the two things that I mentioned there are, if you criticise Jewish Zionism and or the money system, you will be deemed an anti-Semite by X. And those are two of the things that I'm going to speak about today. So if you're watching this on X, maybe you've broken the algorithm. I don't know, because in fact I don't think there's going to be much chance of you seeing this on X. Okay, let's spin back some 1,000 years. And when I say spin back, I'm talking about, I'm continuing with this notion that time is more of a spiral than a linear form. We go back to 1066, as every child used to know, I don't know about these days. William the Norman, known in these parts perhaps as William the Bastard, invaded England. And we have the famous Battle of Hastings, in which King Harold, so the narrative goes, took one in the eye and was defeated by the invading forces. There's more to that story than meets the eye, but for the purposes of today's discourse, I'm going to look at exactly how that invasion was financed. The invasion of England by William of Normandy was financed by the Jewish financiers, and in return for financing his invasion, William permitted those Jewish financiers to settle in England. However, the laws of England at that time did not permit the Jews to own land. But hey ho, that was no problem for the cunning Jewish mindset. And so we saw the invention of the sheetar, S-H-E-T-A-R, a financial instrument which gave a security, if you like, to the financier. The security would be over the property, the land, of the indigenous peoples to whom he was making the loan. And as far as I know, one of the first such sheetars was granted to the Iceni people of what is now known as East Anglia. So in return for a loan from the Jewish financiers, the Iceni signed a security that said, if you don't, you've got security over our property, and that is as a surety that we will pay you back. And so 1,000 years later, here we are, and that sheetar has evolved, if you like, into what is known as a mortgage, a mortgage. A mortgage simply means a dead pledge. Now you might think, what kind of a mindset comes up with such a thing as a dead pledge? What does it mean? A pledge unto death. And again, it requires a particularly twisted mindset, in my view, to come up with such a device. But hey ho, here we are. Where are we now? 2026, and this death grip is still holding the peoples of the Isles of Britain and the world over, come to mention it, in its grip. And with that financial system came, of course, the usury. In other words, the adding of interest on top of loans. Say a Jewish financier loaned you £100 and was charging 50% interest on that. That would mean you had to pay him back a total of £150. And what has he actually loaned you? What has actually taken place? What has he done to earn that £50 profit? Well, the answer is sweet FA. And this is the nature of usury. And in 2026, we have a digital system. We have a credit system masquerading as a money system. And that monetary system is, as it was in 1066, completely in the hands of these financiers, largely of a Jewish Zionist origin. In fact, such is the stranglehold of these financiers to this very day over the financial system. It's probably 99% of all the financial, of the entirety of the financial system is controlled by said Jewish Zionists. Now let's just stop there for a minute and think about that. History shows us that after a while, the indigenous peoples, the non-Jewish peoples, become thoroughly, and I'm expressing this as clearly as I can, they become thoroughly pissed off and fed up to the back teeth of these fraudulent financial systems which essentially are designed to enslave them. A mortgage is essentially a system of financial servitude. Not only are you asked to pay off what is these days just an imaginary loan. No loan takes place, no monies are passed on, it's all credits in a digital system. But nevertheless, the effect is the same. It's got you in a death grip. And of course, they have such devices as compound interest. And the whole thing will eventually, as history shows us, reach such a point that the people are so fucked off with it, they will take action. That's what history shows us. So if we spin forward from 1066 to 1290, and we can look at the Edict of Expulsion, which was initiated by Edward I. Now, it didn't just happen that your ancestors were anti-Semitic, because at that time there was no such thing as anti-Semitism. Well, there is no such thing as anti-Semitism anyway, but at that time it just wasn't a label or something that you could even stick on anyone. I'd rather listen to my ancestors warn me about the Jews than listen to the Jews tell me about my ancestors. What does that mean? Well, essentially, quite simply, it means that such is this death grip that the Jewish Zionists have over the financial system, but also over all the media companies, the broadcasters, Hollywood, the political systems. I mean, even now you can look at the grip that friends of Israel have over the British criminal government and its various parties. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. No, there were a series of events that took place in the 1200s that led to this coming about, this edict of expulsion to the Jewish financiers being expelled from England. It's all going on now, and it all connects exactly to what I was talking about with regard to this shita, this financial instrument. Because at that time, if you were a creditor, and I use that in inverted commas, and somebody owes you some money, and you went to the court in the common law system, as is really what is the bedrock of so-called British justice, then if you did not have the original instrument of indebtedness, in other words, the shita, the mortgage, the bill signed by the party who owed you the money, then that claim would be struck out by the court. Think about that for a minute. If you did not have the original instrument of indebtedness, your claim would be struck out by the court as having no merit. So these financial instruments, these documents, paper proofs, if you like, of a debt, were in and of themselves rather valuable, and they were kept in these strong boxes, in these strongholds by these particular Jewish financiers. Now, you've got the Crusades going on around that time. You've got, before that, in 1215, you had the Magna Carta, and if you look into these aspects of English history, you will see that they were largely they came about as a result of the financial system being in the death grip of these the Jewish financiers, insofar as lords and knights were mortgaging their properties in order to go and take part in the Crusades, and when they were killed, of course, their lands were being seized by the usual suspects, the Jewish financiers. And people were getting very, very fucked off with it. And so you will see there was a clause in Magna Carta, which I'll put in the video so you can read it for yourself, which purportedly dealt with this fact. And right throughout the 1200s, we also have the historical documentation of things like the poisoning of the well and these blood libels. And as I said earlier, rather than listen to these Jewish stranglers and death grip merchants telling me about my ancestors and how they were all irrational, racist, anti-Semitic, I prefer to look at the facts of the matter. The poisoning of the well, who do you think's behind the fluoridation of the water supplies? Is it not the same thing, but on a bigger scale? So all of this was bubbling under right throughout the 1200s. You've got Magna Carta 1215, and then we come to the middle of the 13th century, and there's a character called Simon de Montfort. And Simon de Montfort was largely a lord, maybe not a lord, but a landowner based I think he had a militia, so he was based in and around what we now know as Leicester. And he fully understood just how fucked off the people were with these fraudulent financial practices, to the point where he actually actively got his men together, and they were going around and they were breaking into these strongholds and seizing these boxes containing these financial instruments, because they knew full well that if you didn't have the original financial instrument, then you had no claim over the alleged debtor. And so All that was bubbling under, shall we say, from before the Magna Carta, so, you know, from the 12th century. And it got to the point where King Edward had to do something about it. But let's just pause on that point particularly right now, because it is relevant to where we are in 2026. Namely, if you didn't have the original financial instrument, then you had no claim, and your claim would be thrown out by the court. We spin forward some 800 years to 2026, and we have a captured British judiciary which is enforcing these fake and faked debts in favour of the claimants. Invariably, in 99.9% of cases, when a House of Rothschild controlled financial institution brings a possession claim against an individual who may have defaulted on his death grip, his mortgage, that financial institution does not have the original instrument associated to the alleged debt. Well, how can that be, you might say? It's very simple. Because the fraud is so out of control. These instruments, which are indeed false receipts anyway, because no money is ever loaned, these instruments are sold on in what is known as a securitisation package. It's just another way of generating more money through interest on top of what has already been defrauded from the people. It's like the greed is insatiable. There is no stopping these people. On and on it fucking goes. On and on it goes. Well, what happens at best is that the claimant, the financial institution, will simply rely upon a photocopy of a photocopy of the original deed of mortgage. But that original deed of mortgage is false anyway, because of the way in which it was procured. Because the fact is, there is never, ever any evidence that any loan took place. It's interesting, as I'm speaking all this, I know that this is going to be probably one of my most heavily suppressed pieces, because I'm calling it out for what it is. But hey, it fucking needs saying, does it not? And as I said earlier, I'd rather listen to what my ancestors had to say about Jewish financial malpractice than what the Jewish controllers will tell me in 2026. And, you know, no doubt about it, I'll be labelled an anti-Semite for this. But, you know, we are not fucking idiots. Our ancestors were not idiots. Our ancestors knew when they were being shafted. I know a swindle when I see one. And I identified the Great British Mortgage Swindle as such back in 2009 when I decided to challenge it. So the Jews were expelled, and then we spin forward in time to Oliver Cromwell. And we're going into the 1600s at this point. 1694, you had the establishment of the Bank of England. And the Bank of England is not an independent bank, just as no central bank in any country is independent. These days, well, as was always the case, they are controlled by the Jewish financiers. The private banks, they create credit at the stroke of a pen. They create credit out of thin air. A sovereign country would create its own currency. It would have its own coin of the realm. It would have its own notes, which would be issued interest-free. And whenever this has happened before, historically, there's been no such thing as inflation. Prices have tended to be stable. Cromwell was deployed by said financiers to effectively take out Charles I. They wanted him out of the way so they could bring in their man, who was William of Orange. So 1688, 1689 you had the Glorious Revolution. But essentially, you had a cadre of Jewish financiers operating out of the Netherlands who engineered this situation whereby King Charles was encouraged to flee, they captured him, his head was chopped off, and in return for their financial support, Oliver Cromwell readmitted the Jewish financiers and their various entourages back into England. And so began the next cycle. It's an invidious game. It's an invidious game of possession, of repossession, of demonic possession. Because let's not forget, all of those who are working for in aid of Zionism are essentially, you know, call them what you will. You can call them crypto Jews, you could call them Sabbatean Frankists, but whatever you want to call them, you followers of the you could call them Talmudists, whatever you want to call them, they are essentially deceivers, liars and deceivers, who are using trickery, deceit as a means of enslaving huge swathes of the world's population. And so then, you know, you continue into the, well, you can see from that point on, you can see from 1066 how said Jewish financiers have been financing both sides of any conflict, because of course it is a very profitable business, and it gives them the opportunity to ritualistically slaughter huge swathes of what they call goyim, which, if you don't know, is a insult. It's a Jewish insult aimed at those who are non-believers, non-Jews, like the likes of thee and me. It's essentially saying you're a stupid beast. You are just cattle. I am aware that this is such an immense subject that I can only really just gently touch on it today. From 1776 onwards, we had the deployment, if you like, or the establishment of the Bavarian Illuminati, which again was used by the crypto-Jewish financiers, namely the House of Rothschild and all its cohorts, to take over Freemasonry, which is essentially another captured institution that is operating to the benefit of, the overall benefit of said crypto-Jewish Talmudist financiers. And it's very hard to understand. It's very hard. I can't really understand just how much greed and duplicity and deception is involved in this. But on top of that, you've got a genocidal mindset whereby they are simply of the view that they are culling the herd. You know, you look at the Napoleonic Wars, what happened there? They were attacking Napoleon because he had essentially set up a financial system that was beyond the grip of the House of Rothschild. And at the end of those wars, all the nation countries were in hock to the Rothschilds, who were simply adding on interest to the loans that they'd allegedly made, to the point where it was taking 100, 150 years to pay off these loans. And again, I'm picking out just a few key examples here, but you know, these are a couple of points for you to consider. In the 1800s, we had the British Parliament at that time. You couldn't sit in the Parliament unless you were a Christian, so they had to change it in order to allow the Lord Rothschild to sit as a parliamentarian. And how interesting it is that Lord Rothschild's only speeches in Parliament came as were simply, one of them was on his extolling the virtues of pasteurisation of milk. And pasteurisation is a process whereby the enzymes and the nutrients are simply destroyed through the process of pasteurisation. So all the goodness in the milk is taken out. Now, why, you might ask yourself, why would Lord Rothschild feel it incumbent upon himself to stand up in Parliament and extol the virtues of pasteurisation? He also spoke out in favour of the establishment of a Zionist state. And in America, you had the same thing going on. The Rothschilds wanted to establish a foothold in America, by which I mean they wanted control of the financial system. The culmination of that attempt to take control happened in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, which for them and their associates like the Rockefellers was a wet dream. But in order to accomplish that, they had to exterminate the opposition. And of course, you then see this extermination of the opposition is also very interesting, because in 1812, in the British Parliament, in the lobby at the entrance hall at the House of Commons, you will see that there was the Prime Minister was assassinated by, lo and behold, what they called at the time a lone wolf attacker. You'll have heard that expression before because they're still using it to this day to describe those patsies who carry out assassinations for and on behalf of the controllers. This entire system is so vast, I can only really touch on it this afternoon. You then had the attempted assassination of Andrew Jackson. You did have the assassination of presidents in the United States. And the one thing that connects them all together is that those presidents were against a private banking system which was being run for the benefit of said House of Rothschilds and its various acolytes. And so we move into the 20th century and we see again all the wars that are taking place, all the military campaigns are financed by the same cadre of banksters. I use the term banksters to describe exactly those same individuals that I referenced earlier. That's exactly what I'm talking about. They're still digging and mining as much as they possibly can from the Goyim. And so you see, you will look into it and you'll see, well, the First World War was essentially a banker's war. And you'll see that the slaughter of the white European race continued throughout the First World War and afterwards with the draconian imposition on the German people of the Treaty of Versailles. So if we just remember that a mortgage is a death grip, it's a throttling, and you can see that this is a financial stranglehold, and it's a financial stranglehold that was deployed against the people of Germany to such, I mean, I'm going to call it perverse, such a perverse and invidious effect by the Treaty of Versailles. Tens of millions of people, not just soldiers, died in the First World War. And then we had the rise of National Socialism. We had the initiation of the Bolsheviks, and again, lo and behold, who was funding the Bolsheviks? Stalin, Trotsky and Lenin. Again, who funded them? It's a rhetorical question, you know the answer. The Bolsheviks, who took over Russia and murdered the Tsar, were of course of the same persuasion, same religious persuasion. They were all followers of the Talmud. And so when Adolf Hitler began to create his own currency, his debt-free currency in Germany during the 1930s, that was not to be tolerated at all, but it was very successful. It was a debt-free currency that enabled the German people to build all the autobahns and begin the industrialization of the country up to and including the Second World War. But of course it would not be tolerated, it was not allowed to continue. And so the Second World War was largely fought at the behest of said banking cartel, and once again involved the slaughter of tens of millions of European people. And then we had the rise of the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik, Jewish-controlled Soviet Union, and we know how that worked out. And as far as I'm concerned, all of this is perversion. It's inversion of the truth. And as I've opined on many an occasion, and doubtless will continue to do so through the rest of my years, the financial system, money, if you want to call it that, is the one ring to control it all. And so anyone who is purporting want to bring about change, to do away with the tyranny of these criminal governments, these captured criminal governments, is not going to do anything unless they tackle the issue of money, what it is, where it comes from, and who controls it. So from 1066 to 2026, what's changed? Has the death grip got tighter, or is it beginning to loosen? Has it reached its zenith? And from that point on, are we going to see what has happened before historically? namely the demise of the Jewish kleptocracy, the fraudulent financiers, and all the odious, murderous perversions that come with that. I don't think it's a question of if. I think it's a question of when. Because history, you see, it all comes out in the end. The truth will out, eventually. And what's happening now with regard to the Jeffrey Epstein files and his connections with Peter Mandelson and the ripples that extend outwards from that, in and out of all the political systems, but particularly, it's having a particularly egregious effect on the British political system. And you know, of course you could say, well, isn't it interesting that Peter Mandelson is Jewish, and Peter Mandelson is seemingly a man who loves to make a deal and to line his own pockets with vast amounts of credit. And from that you can see also that we've got all the perversions that are linked to it. It's not just, I mean, the money is perhaps the glue that ties it all together, because Epstein, Mandelson, even Trump, all of them are notorious grifters who are essentially using their positions to gain greater financial wealth, greater financial clout at the expense of the likes of thee and me. And these are the conditions that have always led to the expulsion of the Jews from, what is it, 109 different countries down the centuries. There's nothing new under the sun. What goes around comes around. And it's the same shit that's going on now. It's quite interesting. It's a pantomime of the perverse, there's no doubt about it. But be wary, because I learned a new expression today, and that expression is doom scrolling, whereby the individual, largely on his mobile device, is simply scrolling through the various articles and posts on a newsfeed like Twitter, for example, inevitably coming to the conclusion that it's all one vast conspiracy, and that will have a negative effect on his mindset, on his spirit. So be wary, don't get too dragged into it. I mean, you've got to be aware of these things, you've got to pay attention to a certain extent, but don't let it dominate your thinking. Take note and move on. That would be my advice. Anyway, as ever, I would like to thank you for your kind attention today. It's a bit of a heavy subject. If you do use the social media, you can find me on Twitter at Michael O'Dara. You can find me on Facebook with the same name. And I also have a Rogue Mail channel on YouTube. Remember, we're trying to get it up to 500 subs by the end of the month. So if you're on any of those, like, comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And please bear with me. I'm trying to get the email situation, the email notifications sorted out on my roguemail.org website. But it's proving far more complex and AI dominated than I anticipated it would be. I will get there eventually. If there is anyone out there who's an expert in these matters and you're able to offer me some assistance, then great, please drop me a line. There's a contact form on the website, that is working. Or you can contact me through the aforementioned social media platforms. Oh yeah, and before I forget, I'm on Substack as well. So if you take out a sub on Substack, then you can contact me through that platform as well. So Facebook, X, YouTube, Substack, and the roguemail.org site are the places where my writings and discourses can be found. So, thank you very much, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Cheers.